All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into an ancient story that is, and I mean this, an absolute masterclass in strategy, especially when the odds feel impossible. Okay, I want you to just imagine this for a second. You're facing an enemy army, and you are outnumbered 450 to 1. Yeah, you heard that right. They're like a swarm of locusts covering the land, and your army, well, it's barely a handful of people. So the big question is, how in the world do you win a battle with odds like that? Well, today we're going to unpack the incredible story of Gideon because it's basically a blueprint for taking on any challenge, no matter how massive it seems. So first up, we've got to set the stage. For 7 long years, the nation of Israel was just being completely crushed, not by an occupying army, but by nomadic raiders called the Midianites. See, this wasn't a war of conquest. It was a war of pure consumption. I mean, think about this cycle. It was absolutely relentless. Every single year, right when the harvest was ready, the Midianites would just sweep in like a plague and strip the land bare. They left nothing behind but starvation and just complete hopelessness. People were literally driven from their farms to hide out in caves. Their entire way of life was just gone. And this is where our hero, and I use that term loosely at first, enters the story. And honestly, his introduction tells you everything you need to know about how bad things had gotten. Yeah, Gideon, he was the last person you'd pick to be a champion. He wasn't some mighty warrior, he was just a guy, a product of his time, trying to survive. Get this, he's secretly threshing wheat in a wine press, basically a hole in the ground, just to hide a little bit of food from the enemy. He was, quite literally, in a pit of fear. So you can imagine his surprise when a divine messenger shows up and calls him a mighty warrior. Gideon's response? It wasn't faith, it was pure, bitter sarcasm. He's basically like, "You've got to be kidding me." He starts listing every single reason why he's the wrong guy for any job, let alone saving a nation. Okay, so after a lot of convincing, Gideon finally accepts his mission. He manages to raise an army of 32,000 men. Not bad, right? That's a respectable force. But the strategy he gets next, well, it's completely paradoxical. It throws every piece of military wisdom right out the window. He's told, "You have too many men." Too many. So the army starts to shrink. First command, anyone who's afraid can go home. And just like that, boom. 22,000 men turn around and walk away. That leaves them with just 10,000. You see, the goal here wasn't just about defeating the Midianites. It was about making a point. The victory had to be so obviously miraculous that there was no way, absolutely no way, Israel could turn around and say, "Look what we did. Our own strength saved us." The whole idea of human pride had to be completely taken off the table. And then came the final test. It's kind of weird, but also brilliant. The remaining 10,000 men are taken to get a drink of water, and almost all of them, 9,700 of them, get down on their knees and stick their faces right in the water, totally unaware of their surroundings. But 300 of them, they stay on their feet. They cup the water in their hands and bring it to their mouths, their eyes still scanning, always vigilant. And those 300 men were the ones chosen. So now you have an army of 300. Going up against 135,000. So with an army that small, you're obviously not going to win with swords and shields. The weapons had to be completely different. They weren't weapons of war, they were instruments of pure psychological terror. So what did they get? Each soldier was handed a trumpet, a ram's horn actually, a torch, and an empty clay pot to hide the torch in. That's it. No sword, no shield. The plan wasn't to fight the enemy. The plan was to create so much chaos and panic that the enemy would literally defeat themselves. The whole idea was to create total sensory overload. Imagine being a Midianite soldier, fast asleep. Suddenly, you're jolted awake by this deafening blast of horns from every direction and a ring of fire that appears out of nowhere. You'd think you were surrounded by a massive army, right? That was the plan. And it worked. The Midianite army completely imploded. In the darkness and the sheer confusion, they couldn't tell friend from foe. Their entire camp just dissolved into a frenzy of fear and friendly fire. And Gideon's 300 men,
They didn't have to swing a single sword. They just stood there and watched their enemy completely annihilate itself.
Now, this is an incredible story, but it's so much more than just an ancient battle. It's really a timeless blueprint for facing our own insurmountable odds. You know, the big stuff, whether it's in our careers, our health, or our personal lives. So let's break that down. How does this actually apply to us? Well, every part of the story translates into a really powerful principle. Take Gideon's fear. It shows us that feeling totally inadequate doesn't mean you're disqualified. Or the shrinking army. That teaches us to trust the process, even when it feels like our own resources are disappearing. And think about those weapons. For us, a trumpet could be a bold word of encouragement that just shatters a negative atmosphere. A torch might be that one creative idea that lights up a really dark situation. And that shattered pitcher, that could be the moment of vulnerability that, when you finally let it break, reveals the incredible strength you had inside all along. So the takeaways are pretty clear, right? First, trust that process of reduction. Sometimes losing what you think you need forces you to rely on something greater. Second, don't be afraid to use unconventional weapons. The solution might not be more money or more effort, but something totally different, like a radical act of creativity. And finally, when you do get that victory, don't let it go to your head. Remember where the strength really came from. And you know what? In his finest moment, Gideon got it. He remembered the whole point of the strategy. After the battle, the people wanted to make him king, but he flat out refused. He pointed them back to the real source of the victory. He knew it was never his to claim in the first place. So this ancient story leaves all of us with a really powerful and personal question to think about. It kind of invites us to look at our own challenges differently, not as these impossible walls defined by what we lack, but as opportunities. Opportunities to discover the unseen weapons and the hidden strengths that we already have right at our fingertips.